Hello, hello. I am Evelina Kirika and I welcome you to The Social Post, a podcast that addresses social issues, bringing forth conversations much needed in a turbulent world. From the effects the pandemic has had on education around the world to the future of work, this podcast brings you matters that shape our debates in society. The worldwide education system has been greatly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. As lockdown started across the world, education has been shut down and forced to adapt remote learning strategies. In today's episode, I'm talking about digital learning and education during the pandemic with Caroline Allams from NatherHub UK, Emanuela Di Gropello from the World Bank, and Loredana Bertișan, University Lecturer in Romania. Despite the tremendous efforts made by countries in Latin America to mitigate the lack of in-person education for remote learning, education is taking a serious hit and outcomes are plummeting in the region. Learning poverty by the end of primary education could increase by more than 20%. Over 2 in 3 lower secondary education students could fall below minimum proficiency levels, and learning losses will be substantially larger for the most disadvantaged students. Joining me today from Washington, D.C. is Emanuela Di Gropello, World Bank Practice Leader for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America was in a tough situation even before the pandemic started. 51% of children could not read proficiently enough by their late primary age and are 3 years behind in reading, mathematics, and science. What is the reason for that? Is the situation caused by years of underfunding public education?
It is correct that Latin America was already in a very poor situation from a learning perspective before the crisis. And as you say, what really, what really is striking is the fact that over 50% of the kids could not really, read and understand properly a simple text by the end of primary. Now, there are many reasons to that, which honestly go beyond the funding concerns. There are issues related to teaching and learning itself, including, teacher quality, including pedagogies being adopted, including, for instance, over busy, overcharged curriculum. Other issues were related more to the way systems, for instance, are managed and governed. And finally, it's obviously some issues were also related to funding in some countries, and in particular to how funding was being used to get results. Overall, there is an overall sense that education system were not necessarily geared towards achieving learning. And this is really essential, because when we speak about financing, when we speak about governance and management, when we speak about teaching and learning process, pedagogy, teachers, everything needs to be geared towards achieving learning for the kids and youth, and that wasn't necessarily the case.
How can this be remediated for future generations? What can Latin America do to tackle education inequality?
Now, under this backdrop, we know that the pandemic has caused or is causing, huge issues in Latin America, and we are especially expecting very important learning losses, and we're actually expecting that learning poverty to increase from 50% to over 60%, which is actually a huge increase. And we are in particular expecting that the most vulnerable, the poorest, will be the one mostly affected, with a socioeconomic gap which could actually improve by a further 12%. So I would just like this to be clear. While the situation was already bad and in a crisis before, we are currently facing a crisis into a crisis, where basically, both on average and for the poorest, the learning situation will become worse. And that for a number of reasons, largely related to school closing and the impossibility of distance education to replace face to face. Now, while the crisis is terrible, it does also provide some opportunities to build back better than before. And that gets back to your initial question. We could have an opportunity to reframe our education system much more around the learning objective, which certainly would entail action at many levels, including making sure that kids, are better prepared for education. So that would imply more focus on early childhood education, including making sure that teachers are better prepared and more supported to be really effective in their classrooms, but also making sure at the same time that curriculum and the pedagogical practices are better designed and more effectively implemented. And I would insist on the need to simplify curriculum so that they can really focus on the core and most essential skills. And finally, also, this is an opportunity to improve school infrastructure, to make sure school environment are safer, are more resilient, are more conducive to learning, and make sure the overall governance and financing of education system again are more geared to learning. There are also some immediate low-hanging fruit. The countries have introduced innovations during the pandemic, in particular using data and technology. They have, for instance, designed and implemented early warning system for youth at risk. They have improved the education management information system. They have piloted adaptive learning platform. All those innovations could also be mainstreamed. And as they are mainstream, could also improve education system in the longer run.
In Latin America, only 77% of 15-year-old students have access to internet at home. What has been done to support these students? Have they fallen behind their learning because of it?
So that's a very good question. There are still very big digital divides in Latin America, both across homes and across schools, and in particular, as you say, between wealthy and less wealthy, and urban and rural area. So one positive thing that Latin American countries have done to cope with the pandemic while schools were closed was actually to design and implement what we call multimodal distance learning strategies. So those multimodal strategies do not only rely on internet and on platform, but they also integrate television, radio, or printed material. So that has allowed them to reach out to more people. And that's, I think we need to recognize those efforts. We need to recognize those efforts. And I'd say all countries have attempted to do it. They've reinvigorated, for instance, their TV education, right? So this has been a positive thing. And they've also made attempts to engage families and the kids, to engage parents, to reach out to them. They were even doing this, for instance, through text messages, right? Using fairly low-tech options. Now, on the negative, though, it is clear that distance education cannot replace face-to-face, and even less so when you don't have internet connections. Because one issue that we see, for instance, with TV education, radio, is that these methods are not very interactive. And as a result, it's very difficult to maintain student participation and engagement in the longer run. So clearly, the most vulnerable and the kids and family who don't have internet connection, yes, they might have been reached out through TV and radio, but it has also been very difficult to maintain them engaged. And this is another reason why we're expecting inequities to grow.
Has the school dropout phenomenon been accelerated by the pandemic?
Yes. So we don't have firm data on school dropouts. So we have done simulation on learning outcome, which I've presented before. We don't have firm data, but and we are therefore in the process to update our calculation. Some estimation are showing that dropouts could have increased by at least 15%. I think this is going to be much more. In some individual countries, we are already seeing 100,000 of kids basically not returning to school, and we have estimations in a few countries on this. And again, we need to see what will really be happening. From that perspective, it is particularly important. It is particularly important for country to start now devise strategies to basically keep track and monitor of students at risk. The one more at risk of giving up now during distance schooling, the one more at risk to not return to school, and the one more at risk to start school presentially but then drop because I haven't learned anything for months and they don't have the support or commitment to continue do well as schools are open. So this will be critical. It will be critical for country in Latin America to focus explicitly on this youth at risk.
Is the home situation the main reason for school dropout and disengagement for children from disadvantaged backgrounds?
So I think there are many reasons. One, as I've said previously, is that with less access to internet, they do rely on more traditional. They have relied on more traditional distance education technologies, which therefore produce less engagement. That's one thing. Another aspect, clearly, yes, is related to families. And what we see is that in most vulnerable family, the degree of support of the parents is lower. You have to consider that many of these families, in particular in Latin America, are also facing terrible economic hardship. Terrible economic hardship, obliging obliging them to look for means of survival, which are not necessarily compatible with an education process. And we are expecting to see big impacts, differentiated impact on girls and boys, with boys, probably having to try to find survival mean outside the household, and girls, and in particular, I'm speaking of teenager here, obliged to help, more with family matters at home, to support their parents, and in both cases, this is not conducive or to obviously being being maintained in an education process.
How have teachers adapted their teaching methods to the new reality?
So there have been efforts in Latin America to also support teachers in adapting themselves. What we see is that most countries have actually done, a fairly good jobs in at least trying to provide some short-term training. For instance, our statistics showed that about 82% of the country have made an effort to provide short-term training to the teachers, right, to adapt themselves to this new methodology, which are complicated, right, because they basically have to now share the lessons virtually, and the situation will remain equally complicated as the school reopened partially, as this is already happening in many countries, using hybrid learning. Hybrid learning will involve combining virtual education with face-to-face education, and it will also be a challenge for teachers to be able to share the lessons sometime at a distance, sometimes face-to-face, sometimes just on time, sometimes sequenced. So this will be an issue. From that perspective, again, Latin American countries have made an effort, but it is not enough. It is not enough. Teacher will need to continue grow that digital skills. And when we speak about digital skills, we don't only include skills to be able to use the technologies, the new means, but also skills to be used to pedagogically to pedagogically use those technology, right? So how do you adapt your pedagogical process to those skills, also to be able to keep on communicating with families and the kids, and also organizational skills, how you organize your time, right, to be able to teach in this setting. So in other words, something has been done, it is laudable, but more need to happen to improve teacher digital skills in a broad way to make sure they can continue with some effectiveness in the teaching and learning process.
How do you see the future of education in Latin America?
So again, a lot will depend on how the country manage to recover from this crisis and building back better. So, definitely, as I say, the situation was already bad before. The potential costs are huge. Countries now have an opportunity, first of all, to make all the possible efforts to recover from the losses. And that entails getting ready to reopen the school safely and effectively. Countries need to get ready. Some countries have already started doing it, to be fair, but some other countries are hesitant. And clearly, the COVID situation in Latin America is not what it should be, and there is a lot of volatility. So clearly, safety is imperative. But at a minimum, countries need to be ready for a safe and effective reopening. Effective reopening, in particular, will require a lot of actions now, already in the short term, to adapt academic calendar, to adapt curriculum, to design remedial programs which can really help students who have fallen behind to catch up. And to design a remedial program, countries will also need to be able to exactly measure how much learning was lost. So it's also about designing good diagnostic when school reopen. So again, we need good diagnostic of learning losses. We need effective remedial programs in the context of simplified curriculum and adjusted academic years. This will be imperative. And all that while paying special attention to the most vulnerable, keeping them in school by all means. So a lot of the future, I'd say the future for Latin America is played now, is at stake now in the recovery phase. Beyond the recovery phase, as I've said, there is also an opportunity to build back better if Latin America seizes on this opportunity to mainstream some of those innovations that they've introduced and to take the opportunity to reframe the systems around the notion of learning. I think the future is not necessarily bad. I think the future can actually be better than the past. But for sure, it will require a commitment of everybody in the society. It's not only the schooling actors, it's going to be civil society, and it's going to be governments. And when we speak about governments, yes, it will be really important to put maximum emphasis and priority on education, and that also entails, for sure, protecting funding for education moving ahead. It is not the moment to jeopardize funding for education, and as funding is protected, also use it more equitably and efficiently. Again, clearly, education is a responsibility of everybody. If everybody is committed for a brighter future for Latin America, it could happen.
Emanuela, thank you. You are listening to The Social Post, your weekly wrap-up of social issues debated by experts. If you like us, subscribe to this podcast and follow us on Instagram at The Social Post. You can also find the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Romania had one of the highest rates of early leavers from education and training in Europe, with over 17% of the young people aged 18 to 24 leaving school early as of 2013. The COVID pandemic pushed education even closer to the edge. More children are out of school, while the Romanian government invests every year just 3.4% of Romania's annual national budget. Loredana Bertișan is joining me from Romania. Loredana is a lecturer in journalism at Babeș-Bolyai University and founder of Art for Education Romania. Students in Romania complain about the education system being outdated, overloaded, overwhelmed. It does not match with the skill set required in the job market. Is this the case for Romania, and why?
It can be the case. Sometimes, I don't know, from my perspective, sometimes it's really hard as a teacher if you're not engaged in the workforce, to say like that, um, to know exactly what you have to do for them to be really adapted for the work field. Um, it can be the case also if the students don't speak up, you know, because sometimes we have students, or I have students, to be really particular because each teacher has his own experience. I have students that, I don't know, for half of semester they don't talk with me. So for me it's a little bit hard without feedback to adapt to their needs. So I think that there has to be a teamwork. Students and teachers have to work together for that gap to, I don't know, erase. Um, I can understand the struggles and the problems they talk about. I don't know, in studies maybe you found those informations, but as a teacher and also as a student, because I'm a law student, um, I can say that communication between students and teachers is really important. And for that to change, for the complainings to change, uh, they have to speak up and to give feedback. I ask always for a feedback, but without a name, so they can write there whatever they want. And it's really helpful because I can always change my style of teaching, my way of approaching the subjects, and all of that for them to be um, happier with what we do.
The Romanian Ministry of Education estimates that 2,500 schools have not been connected to the internet during the pandemic. A report from ProTV says that local authorities up to this point haven't secured digital education, iPads, or laptops for students. Why is that?
Well, uh, let me say like that. The Ministry of Education, it's really connected with the school, but not with the universities. So for the students, they couldn't help at all, to say like that. For the little ones, for the little students, to call them like that, it was a big delay from my point of view. If you know that it's a pandemic here, if you know that a lot of children don't have money and parents don't have money to buy those devices, you must do something faster than they did. Uh, I know for sure that in the villages, uh, there were a lot of children without those devices, and for them, to quote one of them, this is like summer vacation, not online school. They didn't understand the concept because they didn't have, I don't know, a laptop or another device to work in online school. So what can I say about this? I can only say that it's really really sad because those children are facing, I don't know, a lot of gaps. I know about some schools in which we work socially for charity, and there the teachers, because the students didn't have devices, the teachers were giving them on paper at each house the tasks, the homework, the tests, and all of that. And it was a lot of work for those dedicated teachers to keep up, with a mask and gloves and everything to help the kids. But if nationally it was a better approach and strategy for them to have the devices faster, it could have been better. The minister gave some devices at some point, but as the media reported, it was a little bit too late.
In Romania, literacy rate is ranked among the lowest in Europe, with more than 40% of young people being functionally illiterate and has a dropout rate of 19%. Has the pandemic accelerated this phenomenon?
Of course, of course. Imagine that a child that had the going to school experience, even if he was struggling, I don't know, with lack of money and lack of conditions at their homes. In school, even if the little one wasn't paying a lot of attention, he was learning something, a little bit of something every day. With the pandemic and everything, that the point was going to zero learning day by day. So of course it did. I think that the most important fact is the fact that at home, the parents, most of them, um, are not understanding the importance of education for their children, because they are really concerned about the living situation. They don't have money, they have to work, they don't know where to work, because in the pandemic a lot of them lost their jobs. And unfortunately, education comes in a point that is not really important for them. They have to live, they have to survive. Romania needs people that care more. And what I want to say with this is that projects on paper look really good. They are amazing and they are perfect. But if you go on villages, you can see that there are still schools where they don't have a functional toilet and electricity. Yeah. There are some NGOs that do projects for them better than the government does. So that speaks a lot of this.
Caroline Ellens is a teacher and co-founder at Another Hub UK, a digital safety educational platform for children. Remote learning is not a natural substitute for teaching and brings a lot of challenges. School is a place where learners grow socially and emotionally. Do you think that virtual education has rather been a disadvantage in this case?
I think yes. I think it's put the teacher at the forefront, and the role of the teacher really has been, elevated in a lot of ways, because technology can't replace that connectivity that a teacher can have with their class. Of course, for some children, they've been able to continue their studies at some level. But yeah, I think it depends on the subject. I think there are certain subjects that can be taught in a didactic approach using technology that can actually be very, very helpful. But I think as soon as we're still working out ways of using AI to really help children's learning styles, and I think that teacher assessment is so valid and so important that I don't think that children have been advantaged really in any way by only having access to remote learning. I think it's been a substitute. I don't think it's been a fantastic substitute. But I also think that children there are a lot of children who have really been resourceful and creative during the pandemic. And I know in the UK there's a tendency to talk about children catching up, and they'll have missed so much of their valuable school time. But in my mind, I think children are very resourceful. I think children have spent a lot of time, on screens and enjoying the benefit of that. Children have got amazing tech skills. They've learned how to code. They've learned so much about digital communication. Children have had time to read and spend time with their families, and there are positives to that. So I think it really depends on the scenario. But I think certainly in the UK there's this race to catch children up on their academic skills that they've lost, and I think that this is really only going to have a detrimental impact on children's well-being and personal and social development, because if they've missed anything at all during this time of remote learning, I think really what they've missed out on is playing with their friends, practicing their social skills, building that social resilience that they so need, and having the feedback from their peers, which I think is really crucial.
How do students remain motivated and engaged in a virtual environment?
That, I think, is probably an easy win for a lot of technology companies, because children generally find screens very engaging if they've been designed to keep children on a screen, which, a lot of gaming environments, of course, have. The problem with a lot of educational frameworks for children is that they've been designed for businesses and they've been shoehorned into schools. So obviously what works in a business environment to speak to colleagues and to organise their day is probably not going to be very appealing to a child. If we're really creating good EdTech products, we need to design and build EdTech products with children in mind, of how they learn and what appeals to them. NataHub is, very visually engaging, and the UI has been only designed with children in mind. We've built it from the ground up, rather and enabled teachers to fit in with that, rather than designing something purely for teachers that we hope children will like. So for us, it was very easy to keep it engaging for children, because as a company we understand how children learn. I think for other companies who have perhaps not designed their product with children in mind, it's much more difficult. And I think, teacher feedback and teacher interaction and use of graphics and visuals, I think unless it's there in the build, in the design, then it's going to be quite tricky to keep children engaged. But obviously, in terms of gamification and fast-moving screens, I think the biggest issue we as adults have is getting children off a screen, not keeping them on one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Social Post. I'm Evelina Chirica, and you can find me on Twitter at Chirica Evelina. Make sure to follow The Social Post on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Instagram at The Social Post.